So McDonald's is like the perfect bomb to
Oh
this.
God, it's the worst. I mean,
And
there's
uh,
fried
is
seed
it
oils.
is it like a certain combination of sugar and salt and fat? It's kind of like it's kind of addictive as well for people.
Well, sugar on an empty stomach is the worst. I mean, the
Yeah.
worst triglyceride level I've ever seen in my entire life, which was in the thousands.
Oh.
Was a patient whose uh, blood was solid at room temperature. Um, and when we drew his blood, his level of triglyceride was so fat. As a percentage, he had almost more fat in his blood than blood. And he looked healthy from the outside, but he was exhausted all the time. He couldn't exercise because his fingers and toes would immediately go numb. His tongue would go numb whenever he had exerted himself, called claudication. The fat would pack into the distal ends of these capillaries and cut off the blood flow. And he had no idea that this was going on, but his favorite thing was half a tub of Ben and Jerry's at night before bed. And so a few hours after a meal, he'd whack down a nice little pint of
Yeah.
Ben and Jerry's because he was so highly metabolic and active, and had he was an endomorph. He just a lean body mass. He was able to get away with it physically. And when I pulled his blood, had a really serious talk with him. We had to actually put him on a ketogenic reset diet and really metabolize the fat out of his bloodstream because that was life threatening.
Yeah, I do admit I'll hit the Ben and Jerry's sometimes, but it's not very frequently. So,
I mean, look at the end of a meal, it's not the worst thing in the world.
yeah.
I don't put everybody on the raw vegan diet or a keto diet. I don't think one diet fits all. With Dana White, he had a life-threatening level of triglyceride when I first met with him, and I think it was a very hard concept for him to understand that he had a very high level of fat in his blood. So I was going to
You,
put him on a high-fat diet in order to bring it down.
you know what's surprising to me is that a guy of that stature, you'd think he'd have like the best medical advice, and somebody would have picked up on that before. You would expect, right?
Well, he was severely insulin resistant and pre-diabetic, nearly an insulin dependent diabetic. He wasn't quite to the six above he was above 6.4, but he hadn't made it quite to 7.0 on the hemoglobin A1C, which is where you
Yeah.
determine somebody needs insulin. So he was almost to the point where he needed insulin to control his blood sugar. I mean, he was on a CPAP machine, he was on heart medication, he was on blood thinners. He was on a whole myriad of pharmaceuticals.